Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, all. I'm Stephen de Vries, CEO of IriusRisk, and welcome to our webinar on useful AI and meaningful threat modeling. So I'm joined today by Daniel Cuthbert, who's a global head of cybersecurity research at let's just say, global bank. And he's been involved with OWASP, one of the founders of OWASP, and he's currently heavily involved in security research and, of course, in AI. And I'm also joined by Fraser Scott, member of the Threat Modeling Manifesto Group, and, of course, our VP of Product at IriusRisk. Welcome both. Great to have you on.
Thank you. Very cool to be here.
Pleasure.
Right. So let's start at the beginning with threat modeling, and Dan, you've been doing it for a long time. How have you seen threat modeling evolved?
You make me sound old. I'm only 23.
Me too, Dan. Me too.
It's interesting. Like when we started to do the original OWASP testing guide, which was 2002, 2003. Mark and I put a piece into that original testing guide. And for those who aren't aware, the OWASP testing guide came about because we had these newfangled web applications, and there was nothing really out there to say how you went about doing a web application test. So the testing guide was kind of trying to set the scene. And we put in a thing there that said, you should be doing some form of threat modeling for the application to understand the threats and the countermeasures and so on. And we thought we were really clever. The reality is that it never really picked up because threat modeling was really hard to do. And to some degree, it still is, right? You've got Stride, you've got Dread. It assumes the viewer understands the ever-growing complex amount of threats that are out there and how attackers are subverting controls and how the countermeasures work. So over the last 15, 20 years, I'd say threat modeling was always a lovely thing to think about. The reality was it just didn't work. I think in recent years, we've almost seen a bit of a renaissance when it came to threat modeling, where all of a sudden, it's now easier to use in a way. A lot of people now understand the benefits of it. You hear people talking about doing threat models, personal threat models. Have you done a threat model on that? And I think that's fascinating. And then you've got tools that kind of abstracted the need for a user who's doing a threat model to really understand the threats, to say, well, actually, you're never going to learn that. Unless your world is security research and you live and breathe it, you're not going to do that. And I think that's where we've seen the evolution. And then the last year has probably seen the most significant change I've seen in my time when it came to threat modeling.
And Fraser, you're in your previous life, you were doing threat modeling, I think training developers to do threat modeling. Have you seen changes similar to Dan?
Yeah, I think the biggest change I've seen over the last sort of 5 years or so is how it's gone from a niche practice that's hidden in a few books somewhere to something that's a lot more mainstream, a lot more talked about. In my experience of rolling out threat modeling in an enterprise, it was always easy to get started. You can rock up to an engineering team. You can, in 2 hours, teach them how to do threat modeling, and they get it. They understand the value of it. But doing that at scale is where the challenge is, right? So if you've got 1,200 agile teams, for example, scaling threat modeling and having the consistency and all that kind of stuff, that's where organizations have struggled. But also that's, I think, where threat modeling has been catching up. So it's taken it from this very bespoke manual process where you need a really good facilitator who knows what they're doing. They know how to guide them. They know how to talk to developers. That's a very rare skill. And we're seeing that shift to, okay, this is now almost maybe not quite commoditized yet, but it's certainly getting to a point where it's a lot more accessible to anyone, whether you're in an enterprise or in a smaller organization. So I think that's going to continue as well.
Yeah, it was interesting, Dan. When you said that threat modeling has kind of entered our common vocabulary, I've heard that a number of times where people would say, "Hey, that's not in your threat model," or put that in your threat model. And it's interesting to see that it's become part of maybe not common speech, but at least within the cybersecurity space, people are using the terminology. And coming around to AI, and we are on the last day of NVIDIA's GTC conference today, where, of course, the prognostications are there's not going to be any more software development. Everybody's going to be writing text, and that's going to become our software, and NVIDIA's chips are going to turn all of that into code for us, which may or may not happen. But curious on from what you've been experimenting with, Dan, any interesting things in the AI cybersecurity space?
A few. I'm trying to cut through a lot of the FUD and the hype because there's a lot of it. One of the areas that I've mostly been looking at for the last 2 years is how can you not remove the developer from the process? I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe I'll be proved wrong. I think the term that I've liked for a long time is co-pilot. And indeed, if I look at how I use a large number of the models that I'm using on a daily basis, both commercial and ones on my laptop, they are indeed a co-pilot. Little things that have completely revolutionized how I write code. I now use GitHub's Copilot a lot for doing the tasks that I didn't like doing before. And some of the things it's very good at is document this code. Phenomenal. It's really good. Write unit tests. I'm like, why would I want to do that? Nobody enjoys writing unit tests. But then as the models have got better, I can select parts or bits of a function and say, can you explain the threats to me? And I'm seeing how that model is evolving, where it's now saying, this could pose a threat because further up the chain, you're passing in a variable that's not being validated, and it's not getting to this point yet, but that could be a future threat. And I'm like, that's clever. That's really useful. And then the other things where you're starting to see the convergence of, say, like I said, with threat modeling using AI. So now people can talk to the model like they would do, saying, show me the threats of running, I don't know, a fancy new AI API in the cloud without authentication. And then it starts to give you that stuff. That's where I'm playing at the moment. And then obviously I'm doing a lot on the offensive side. I'm like, is the model or the models out there any good at doing offensive stuff? Because there's a lot of that argument. Like in the future, AI is going to write polymorphic code that bypasses it. I'm like, no, it's not. I can't be yourself down. If you've spent a lot of time with models, a lot of the times the code that comes back, you still need to massage. You still need a human to go through that and go, that's never going to work, it won't compile. Or actually, as you've seen with Claude 3, it's a lot better than, say, GPT-4 code. So that's kind of where I'm playing at the moment in the experiments of AI.
Yeah. So you see it more being a kind of collaborative team effort of humans plus Copilot creating code rather than humans just doing humany bit and then handing over to AI to do everything code related.
Yeah, at least in my experience, I've been playing with a variety of languages. This week I went full hipster and I've been doing HTML and CSS. My jeans are very tight and I wanted to have some hipster facial hair, but it didn't work. All the way through to Rust. And I thought, if you could do Rust properly, which is a fairly hard language to get your head around, then the others should be easy. But what I'm seeing is time and time again, you need that human understanding. You do need that experience to say that won't work, or it just doesn't have the context. A lot of the times these models don't have the context with large code bases.
Dan, just out of curiosity, have you given Haskell to any of the models yet?
No, no. I thought Rust was hard enough. For my sins, I decided to try and learn Rust, and I thought the easiest thing would be writing a web server. That was a stupid thing to do. Because just doing the security stuff, the threat modeling on building a web server that can handle this stuff that's on the internet is really hard. But it's been a great benchmark for a lot of the models to say, how would you validate this? How would you handle this? I'm not going down the Haskell route yet. Not a bad idea.
Yeah. We did come, I think you passed this to us, Dan, was a tool called Stride GPT, which uses GPT in the background and applies Stride to bits of text. There's a link in the chat there if anybody's interested in trying it out. But that's certainly an interesting aspect, and we've seen a number of talks at some conferences where folks are trying to bend GPTs into doing threat modeling. Friend Fraser, you've done some experiments on this. Anything you'd like to share with us on things that have worked and things that haven't?
Yeah, it's interesting. there's I think you need to distinguish between, let's say, a naive approach. So anyone can open up ChatGPT and say, right, I'm building a thing, give me a threat model for this, and you'll get some mileage from it. If you know nothing about security, it will give you results. It will say, here are some threats and here are some things to do about it. It even sort of prioritize them. I think the first challenge is, if I'm a developer, for example, I know the system that I'm building to some extent. Obviously, I'm probably still thinking it through. I'm still refining it, etc. But I have it in my head, and that's what I'm going to have to turn into code. So if I ask a ChatGPT or some other AI system to write code for me or for help me with the design, then I can validate that. So I know whether the LLM or whatever it is, it's given me something sensible or not back. But when it comes to getting like threats and controls back from a AI system, I'm not in a position to really judge that. So I think the first thing you need to do is really distinguish between what can I understand and what can I validate versus what does somebody else need to understand and what can somebody else validate. And then I think there's also some interesting challenges with the sensitivity of the context you're providing. So the way you phrase things, the biases in your language. Again, there, in the toolkit of AI, LLMs and RAG and prompt engineering and things like that, there are ways around this, and it is possible to architect solutions that are robust. But if you take a bit of a naive approach, then you risk getting yourself into a bit of a blind spot where you become almost get stuck in a little echo chamber. So I think you can get some mileage from taking a simple approach to using ChatGPT or whatever. But I think that what I've learned in the last 6 months of the year is actually a surprising amount of engineering goes into building these LLMs and these AI systems to be effective and robust and ensure that you're not sending developers down rabbit holes, for example. So there are a lot of dangers, especially in terms of the language and how you set this stuff up.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, that it matters who is the user, right? So if it's a developer using your AI-powered threat modeling tool, it needs to behave differently versus it's a security professional using your AI-powered threat modeling tool, because one person will be able to make a judgment call on this is nonsense and this isn't, and this is gold, and the other one may struggle with that determination.
Yeah, it'd be like, again, the equivalent would be Dan, a very smart developer, being able to judge the feedback he's getting from Copilot and saying, I've got to massage this and I've got to do something with it, versus, I don't know, some got to be careful what let's say an accountant or someone like that trying to develop software using AI and not really understanding how software architecture works, etc., and not being able to judge whether the code being generated back is appropriate or not for the task. A developer can do that, an accountant can't. A security expert could do that for threats and the controls. A developer, unless they are very good at security, can't.
Yeah. And we've got a question here that came in from Dieter saying, even with very detailed prompting using Stride GPT, I'm still seeing that the results tend to be generic. I wonder if there's a problem that threat models may not have enough source data to allow the AI engines to build realistic models. Because there wasn't a lot for them to learn on in order to come up with the answers. And it was also my initial experience with ChatGPT is the key is not to use the phrase threat model. As soon as you use threat model, then it kind of keys into the universe of Stride, and immediately everything just becomes Stride. Whereas what you actually want are the security threats, and if you tend to use the security threats, you end up with better results than if you use the term threat model, because it tends to find other results there. Dan, you had some thoughts on this?
Yeah, so it ties back to what I said at the start. Threat modeling as a genre is hard because, one, it assumes, and wrongly so, that you know all the threats, and we typically not documented them as much as you'd like. So naturally, when they're using this to create the vector databases, they're scraping within the internet, you are going to get that generic type feel to it. And I agree with the person who said the question, like, you do get that genericness back. And I think that's where, at the moment, I'm busy experimenting with kind of a blended approach. So you use the power of GPT-4 or something else, but then you've got local models, Olama, where you're using Mistral or something, and you build it on your own private sources. Not the easiest thing at the moment. I won't lie, but I think that's at least a glimpse into the future where I'm saying, right, if I've got, let's say, an organization, I've got every single pen test, vuln scan, and bug bounty report that we've had over a 5-year period. And we've got it into a usable format, and then we trained a model on that. So it's very tailored towards us as a company. We build widgets, right? We then use that alongside GPT-4 or whatever you want to use and say, right, given your knowledge of our systems, can you help me build a threat model for this new widget? The models that are in use, because they're multi-models, have more context about the threats that you're concerned about. And we're not there at the moment. We're definitely getting there, but I think that's one of the shortcomings. And when Matt, who made Stride GPT, and I do love Stride GPT, let me get to that. I think it's brilliant what he's done. He has empowered non-security experts to at least wet their lips in threat modeling. And for me, well done. Like, we tried to do that 22 years ago. It didn't work. Fair play to him. He's building something that people are using. But I think there's a lot of work that's going to come about to either better train models to understand it, and we're not there yet, or work out how we do multi-model approaches.
Yep. Yeah, makes sense. And in terms of accountability and hallucinations, is that hallucinations are definitely a problem with LLMs at the moment. Do you see that as being a key problem for threat modeling?
I do, because a lot of people trust the models. They sound like a Big Four consultant who's 22 years old, who's coming in to tell you how to run a business, right? You have to believe them, they're wearing a suit. We had that same problem with a lot of the models. And I think, as Fraser alluded to, unless you've got that experience to go, actually, you're talking rubbish, it sounds plausible. It really does. And I think that's a problem that we still need to try and fix. GPT-4, still today, when I use it, will come back with stuff and you think, where the hell did you get that from? And only because I know it, I'm like, no, that's absolute rubbish. Or my favorite ones is that it will make up functions in a language that don't exist, but by God, you wish they did. Because you're like, that's genius, what an amazing function. And you go into Python and type in import and like, huh? That should exist. So yeah, I think it's a big problem still.
Yeah.
The thing I find interesting about LLMs in particular is they're sycophantic, right? So they are designed to please you, and they will do everything they can to please the user. And if you say, no, that doesn't make any sense, it's like, oh, yes, I'm sorry. And then it does whatever else it thinks it needs to do to keep you happy. That's not the same thing if you brought a security expert into the room and you're doing your threat modeling. The security expert will more than happily tell you that what you're doing is insane, or that you're thinking about things wrong, etc. Hopefully they articulate it well. So I think this is solvable. I think we will get there. And I think there are ways of engineering around this, but you do have to be careful of, AI being just a mirror that you're holding up to yourself, and you're always just getting back what you put in, and never really having any of the assumptions that you are starting with tested, which is what a human or a process can help you address.
Yeah, and this just this phrase of hallucinations. I was talking to Gary McGraw the other day, and he made a great point about the fact that this is kind of cutesy language. You say it's hallucinating, and if you plugged into an Excel sheet and said add 4 and 4, and it came back and told you it was 9, you wouldn't say Excel is hallucinating. You'd say it's wrong. It's wrong. That's not the right answer. You did a wrong thing there. And because LLMs are, I think, they're working on maybe a much wider problem space, we kind of give them a bit of leeway and say, well, you're hallucinating. You haven't given me an absolutely wrong answer there. And it's maybe shows our bias that we want these things to work.
Well, I mean, sorry, without getting philosophical, right? They hallucinate by design. It's how they work, and depending on your theory of mind, so do humans, right? So I think the thing that we're going to have to overcome is these things behave a lot more in a human sense than we're used to. We expect a machine to be a raw calculation machine that is wrong or right, but humans aren't wrong or right necessarily. And we're going to have to shift our expectation of AI to be more. I always think of, if I get a response from an AI system that is as good as I would expect from another human, biases and all that stuff is included, then that's as good as you're going to get, right? These things are not divine. These things are not tapping into some universal truth. They're as good as the information that they're built on. So,
yeah, great point. Yeah, we've got 3 questions that have come through, so I'm going to just answer these quickly. From Panagiotis, how do you plan to interface with or integrate IriusRisk with OpenCRE? They both, or they work on also on the AI front in the context of this OWASP project. Yes, we are internally using OpenCRE to do a lot of the mapping in our own threat libraries, and that will be coming out, I think, is it end of April? Fraser, don't not to put you on the spot, but more or less. Yeah.
brand new components, completely refreshed, all tied to standard and everything using OpenCRE.
Perfect. And the next one is, would it make sense to train models on CVEs that have POC code available? That came from George.
I like the former part, and it's something that I've been doing. Yes, 100% train it on CVs. The problem with proof of concept code is that that's another bugbear of mine in the industry. The threat intel industry loves that. They're like, well, we're not seeing attacks. We're not seeing POC code on GitHub. That's not how that world works. But agree, training on CVs, having done that, it's really, really beneficial. And I didn't realize up until a couple of months ago that you can actually get the CV list as something really usable that allows you to parse it. So 100%, yeah, it's something that I've been playing with to bring into that context, because now I've actually got a list of generic issues and vulnerabilities that are happening. Cool, I can now train and make my models hopefully much better.
Yeah, interesting. And a question also from Bill asking, what about security-specific LLMs like Google SecPalm? Do these bring any value to the threat modeling field?
Fraser?
I haven't actually tried those yet. So for me, that remains to be seen. If I had to guess, I think, again, if you maybe split threat modeling up into 2 halves, the context that the engineering team is working with and the security context, I suspect that they'll help with refining the threats and the controls. And if you have maybe 2 or 3 different models that glue this stuff together, I suspect they'll help on that side of things. I have been pleasantly surprised with ChatGPT's, in this case, ability to understand the kind of stuff developers work on a regular basis. It's the stuff that it's been trained on has a pretty good grasp of what systems look like. It can generate very powerful sort of diagrams of what the kind of stuff developers are building. So I think using that plus some very specific security models probably takes you further than sort of using ChatGPT for the generic security stuff. But I'm speculating at this stage.
I like SecPalm. I do like what Google's doing there, mostly because, again, they're bringing context. They've got a phenomenal resource for the VirusTotal. I mean, if you want to understand how the malicious world works, you've got VirusTotal, so it makes sense to use that. And then one of the good acquisitions in recent years when they acquired Mandiant, great threat intel company that have a lot of useful data, will bring that in. And I think we've started to see the children from that marriage. And I'm really keen to play around with Palm 2. But yeah, SecPalm for me is a big win, and I can actually see that being more beneficial for security use cases like threat modeling than anything else.
Yeah. Can we trust the Copilots and the GPTs at the moment to generate secure code? Will they generate bug-free code? Let's put it like that.
I was about to say,
include
what's secure code?
Yeah. Need to do a threat model for that.
Yeah. In my experience, I've tried it, and this is kind of a big chunk of my experiments on an almost monthly basis now. Given all the language that we're playing with, I've been trying to build various functions that take data, work with data, because we know throughout our history that it's our kryptonite. We really suck at doing any form of data manipulation, from deserialization to storing it or so on. What I'm finding so far, probably in the last 6 months, is that the models have got a lot better, mostly because they've been probably trained on better data sets, at suggesting more robust code. I'm not going to say secure code. I'm not going to say bug-free code. I work a lot with Copilots, GitHub Copilots. I wish Microsoft gave it a different name, GitHub Copilot. and especially the Copilot X, which is the new one that was specifically trained on code only. And for the best part, the code that I'm being suggested, I have not found any security issues yet. And that's 5 months of throwing everything at it. Don't hold me to that, but so far, I'm at least going, wow, that's pretty cool. You can handle an object or a blob, and you're at least saying to me, hey, we're going to handle this in a way. By the way, you're not checking that the right file extension's there, or you're just dumping it straight into GridFS. That's a really bad thing because of X, Y, and Z. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. But it's still, even if the code is bug free, it's not necessarily secure because it doesn't understand the context. It doesn't know that,
exactly.
the personal data it's storing has to be stored in a certain way because it's, EU sensitive data and needs to comply with GDPR, for example.
And that's where you have these other things. Like, I'm a big fan of CodeQL. I think in all the decades I've been doing this, CodeQL is the most exciting variant analysis framework I've ever used. Like, I'm finding more bugs with that than I did anything else. But it's all part of the onion, right? You want to have all these various controls that if you are in your VS Code and you write code and you save it, you're having something run. By the time you get it into GitHub, there's another action that's checking that code. There's all these things that are literally making sure that eventually that code is robust. And I think this is just part of the cog. Yeah.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of using AI in cybersecurity, I'm going to launch a poll here. So if you're a participant, would be really interested in your view here on, how do you see AI working for cybersecurity? Is it going to be positive or negative or a passing fad? Let's see what you think about usable AI in cybersecurity. And on the topic of Copilot and vulnerabilities, there was an announcement yesterday from GitHub about new functionality for detecting and automatically patching code. So I'll paste a link in the chat here where they're talking about GitHub now has the ability not just to identify bugs, but to automatically go and fix it for you and do the pull request and everything. So it's, I think, a really good advance to what we eventually did with the buffer overflow by, creating memory safe languages that hopefully that's going to make a dent in building more secure applications.
It is. And when we did our Black Hat talk, so we did a talk about discovering initially post-quantum cryptography in code bases at scale. And we worked with Microsoft and GitHub on this, but that very quickly turned into, let's just discover cryptography, right? Because we've got the variant analysis. One of the things that we wanted to do, and the video should be coming out soon, is you get to see that AI saying, hey, we found you using MD5 to generate this. That's not the best way of doing it. We've automatically rewritten it, and we're going to do a pull request. And when I saw that in action, and that was a beta, I was like, that's going to be phenomenal, because now you've got the ability, a bit like Dependabot. I rely heavily on Dependabot. I really do. If I could have something that says, Daniel, you're an idiot, you're using MD4, really bad, and it looks through my code and says, we've done a pull request, like, you've just saved me 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I think for me, AI at the moment is about saving me time, right? I want to go and finish work earlier so I can go mess around with my kids, I can play football, I can do other things that are important than going, how do I replace MD4 again? That's the benefit for me.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's, there's a lot of promise to make us more productive in that sense, and also to free us up. We can start thinking about the more creative problems that we're pretty good at solving, and free us up from the rote work. The results from the poll are in 69% mostly positive and 25% unsure. That's the cynical cybersecurity practitioners for you. Great to have you on the call, but yeah, 25% unsure. Absolutely. We don't know yet. So let's switch tack a bit. And I'm going to switch to you, Fraser. So we've been doing internally at IriusRisk, we obviously are building AI into our threat modeling platform. And I think what's unique about the tool that we're building is we are building it primarily for engineers, not for cybersecurity folks. And that also influences the way we want to use AI in the tool. Can you share something on that, Fraser?
Yeah, definitely. I'll set some context first, and then I'll do a quick sort of demo video. So before I do that though, we're taking a particular approach to this because we are a security company, and a lot of customers and large organizations rely on our product, and they rely on what they get from our product in terms of the threats and controls. So the first problem we're tackling with AI is making it easier for a developer to get to a good enough threat model as quickly as possible. Again, saving them time. It's easy to give a security engineer a tool and you pay them to go and use a security tool, but developers don't get paid to do security. Anything you put in front of them is often seen as a blocker or adds in friction or just makes their day worse in some way. So we really want to introduce threat modeling to them in a way that actually makes their lives easier and makes their lives in their day-to-day tasks more effective. So we're focusing on getting to that good enough threat model as quickly as possible, and then letting the IriusRisk platform do what it does best, which is then pulling in the threats and the controls from our extensive knowledge base. So what we'll see in a second is there's a number of different use cases that we've been exploring, all of them really effective. So we've been looking at generating the threat model from documentation, so your Confluence page and whatever description of the software you have. We've been looking at it from the user story perspective, maybe copy and paste from an epic or the user stories themselves. Code as well. We'll be doing some stuff with Go amongst other languages. But then actually what I'm going to show you is a meeting transcription. So forgetting about whatever documentation or before you've even written a line of code, if you just take a bunch of developers having a conversation, that can get you very far into the threat modeling process just by having recorded that conversation. So let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah. Okay. So I'll play this. So what we're going to see here is a real meeting taking place between developers, just discussing as part of it was a part of a stand-up what they are working on next. So there's a bit of back and forth debate. You can't hear the actual conversation, but you can see that we recorded the transcription of the meeting. We can see it being typed out in real time, this discussion between Victor, Kanye, and Harold. As you'll see in a second, just being able to capture enough of this conversation. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be, War and Peace. It doesn't have to be half an hour of them talking about every single nuance. Just, 5-10 paragraphs is enough to be able to feed this into Jeff, which is the name of our AI system, give that transcription to the AI. In this case, we're using Slack as the interface. And right off the back of that, it will generate the threat model. So it's building the diagram, giving the diagram to IriusRisk, and then IriusRisk is turning that into a full-blown threat model, bringing all the countermeasures, etc., as you need. And of course, you're in control, right? So you are the one, it's your threat model, so you can edit it, you can make the changes that you need. AI is just, as Dan said, like it's a co-pilot, it's just helping you, it's just taking you through the process of not having to start from scratch. And then, a few clicks and you've sent 10 Jira stories to your Jira backlog. So literally going from a meeting to Jira stories in your backlog within minutes. That's all it took. Very powerful, very effective. And as I said, this works with source code, this works with documentation, this works with user stories and conversational meeting transcriptions.
Very cool. So, the part that or that the AI may generate incorrect information is in transcript or text and turn it into diagram. And that's precisely where the user can come in and say, that's not my diagram, or it's 90% right, but that component shouldn't be there, delete it, or that data flow isn't correct, change it. And an engineer has that ability. They're building the application. They know what that diagram should look like. And then to generate the threat, so the security specific information, we use our regular deterministic rules-based and library-based system to go and generate those threats and controls, because we know, that's deterministic. There's no room for error there.
And we have all the references to the standard. We have all of the context as well that's needed to tie that in.
Yeah. Very cool. And I've got another comment here from Matthew. Related to secure code, GitHub is implementing autofix by combining Copilot and CodeQL, but we still miss the business context. Yep. Absolutely, absolutely. You know, without it's still just looking at a very narrow focus. And even if it was a human doing this, the human also has a very narrow focus. They're just looking at the code. They're going to come up with a very narrow view on how important is this, and how critical is this. As soon as you widen the view, we'll be able to give them a better business context.
And we've had that since the start of the industry. Stephen and I both used to be pen testers. The one thing that we always struggled with was business logic flaws, because we never had the context, right? We could do application flaws, we could do network level flaws, we could do all the kind of testing that we were very good at. But if the bank or the insurance company said, actually, in the functional spec, you are not allowed to move funds more than 10,000 to that account, if that wasn't documented anywhere, we would never know how to test it. So I don't think that problem is necessarily a new one with AI or any of the autopilot stuff. It still needs to be documented somewhere for either a human being or a model to go, actually, and by the way, the business context is this. So maybe that's something that this meeting from Jeff, which I think is a great name, by the way, you know, you could say, listen, we don't want funds to move out over here from a business perspective. Well, there you go. It's recorded.
Absolutely. Yeah. It needs that context. Otherwise it doesn't know what is important or what isn't. Awesome. We've got a few more questions coming in, and also going to launch a new poll. So, you know, this is the work we'll be doing around AI. Very keen to understand if any of the participants, if you are currently using AI for a cybersecurity use case. And maybe you could share some of it in the Q&A if there are any examples that you think would be useful to anybody to know. But poll is live now, and we'll see the results coming in a second. Quick questions from Danny. Does Jeff also help with the community version? Yes, we are going to have it in the community version, so it'll be there. And another one from Panayotis. Would it be possible at point to monitor the daily agile meetings and update an existing diagram as the project progresses? Man, that would be amazing. Yeah. I mean,
let me give a quick answer on that. So the way we're architecting this is, of course, there'll be API endpoints. So we're not going to be limited to Slack, obviously, for Jeff. We're not going to be limited to the IriusRisk UI. The goal is to be able to put this wherever you happen to be working. And if you want to take your meeting transcription and automatically feed them into IriusRisk, there'll be an API endpoint to do that. So that's the direction we're heading in.
Awesome. And Fraser, this is not me asking you when will Jeff be released to customers. This is Miguel. So, you know, it's not the CEO always asking when is the delivery date product. This is Miguel. So when will Jeff be available to customers? Any dates?
So we have an MVP that we are opening up to a select few customers at the end of this quarter, and the goal is to have this production ready for the general availability the next quarter. So at some point in Q2, this will be available to customers and the community edition.
Yeah, awesome. And it would be great to get your feedback. It will be on community, so we do want to see. Is it useful? Where does it work? Where does it fail? So we can make it better, and make threat modeling, for that seamless integration. If it could be listening in on your daily stand-ups and automatically updating the threat model, that'll be magic. I mean, to be honest, I didn't think that taking a transcript was going to be feasible and using that to generate a threat model, and here we are. So it's the sky's really the limit.
I have one for you then, as a customer and a friend. So does that mean the IriusRisk team are going to have explainability about the model and transparency as to how the model works? Something that a lot of AI companies at the moment are really, really struggling with, which is why we've got work from AI Act and the EU and the UK. I mean, that'd be a first, just saying. Fraser?
Right, thanks for putting me on the spot. Yes and yes. So firstly, again, we sort of technically bypass where the explainability matters, which is where the threats and the controls have come from. Because again, that I think is going to be if you're an auditor and you've been given a threat model that's basically come from a black box and the organization's been hacked, and the answer is, well, because the AI told us that this was the threat model, I think you're going to have a problem with this explainability. Again, because we use our rules engine, because we use our library of threats and controls, we have explainability on that side of things. So then we're focused on, okay, how did you get to this diagram? There is an element of explainability. We can be fairly transparent with how we've reached this conclusion. But again, the user's in control, right? So we're not going from 0 to a complete threat model without user involvement. They can edit it, they can adjust it, they can tweak it as needed. So again, I think we've managed to bypass the big trap that if you had I don't know, an AI-based an AI-based security system working on big data that was making decisions on behalf of the users, I think the explainability is a lot more important there, but we're not making the decisions on behalf of the user. We're just helping them through the process, and we're streamlining the process for them. So that may change. And then next year we may want to tackle the rules engine and maybe extend that with AI capability. Then the explainability becomes more of a challenge. But for now, we've managed to bypass that challenge.
Yeah, and I think we took a kind of a conservative approach because we work with highly regulated industries where this matters. You know, the auditor coming in saying, why is that the threat model? You need to be able to answer that. But question is, does that matter to everyone? You know, if the AI is right in getting you a threat model and it's 90% correct, like does that 10% error matter or not? And you know, I think that's going to vary for different industries.
I think you have to really be aware of the false positives versus the false negatives and understand where you accept. Would you rather have a threat model that sends a development team down a rabbit hole because you give them sort of false positives in terms of threats? Or would you rather have a 90-80% complete threat model that may be missing some key things, but you're okay because you have a security review process further down the line that would catch that? You have to look at the broader context of the threat modeling program.
Yeah. And Dan, how are you thinking about this at the moment? You know, do you think it's more important to have that explainability and to be more accurate, or you know, is there kind of a margin for error here that's acceptable given the speed that you can gain by using AI?
I wouldn't say I want something to be 100% effective. I just don't think it exists. I think having explainability as to how the model came to that point helps. At the moment, we don't really have it. You know, people are trusting these amazing computers to tell us stuff that sound real. I think if we're looking at what's happening in various legislation, which for once I'm looking towards it going, that's clever. The AI Act is one thing I'm quite impressed by, in that they're actually saying we don't want unacceptable risk, right? We want people to really think about this and explain how the model got to that decision if you're basing it on something else. I think for threat modeling, you know, 60-70% accuracy, again, it's that co-pilot aspect. As Fraser said, you still need somebody to go in. No, that's not going to happen there. But I think at least explaining how it got to that point would be really useful. The other thing I really would love models to do, not necessarily Jeff, is where they're pulling their sources from. You know, has it just been trained on Stack Overflow, which we all know in history is touch and miss if it's going to be good or not. But I think that's where maybe the explainability comes in. But I wouldn't say I want something completely accurate. I'd never really expect that.
A bit of a word of caution as well. If again, ChatGPT in particular being sycophantic, if you ask it to explain a decision, again, it can just hallucinate some explanation. So be careful if you do ask ChatGPT to explain why it did something. It also just how much can you trust the explainability of the explainability, etc.
I had the same thing with my kids when I asked them who did it, and they both point either way, and it's exactly the same. It's like an 8-year-old or an AI model. It's the same response.
Yeah, that was Fraser's point right at the start. You know, we're putting the bar too high for AI models. They're pretty much at human capability for most things, and we just we expect too much from them. Yeah, humans behave like this. While we talk about the AI Act, Dan, because I think that's really interesting, I'm going to launch another poll around you know, if anybody's doing threat modeling at the moment, how are you doing it? Would be curious to know how it's embedded into your processes. And then, you know, for us to switch onto the AI discussion, the regulatory discussion, because the EU AI Act was passed last week or so, and you're quite impressed by it, Daniel.
I am. I'm impressed by actually two governments at the moment, US and UK. I think the AI summit last year at Bletchley Park, like, I'm critical of UK government, but I think they were really good with that, bringing the key stakeholders in. Kind of what I'm seeing at the moment from a policy perspective is nothing new. It's nothing groundbreaking, right? Build safe and effective systems. Thinking about data privacy, right? Have the explanation side. Make sure you're thinking about algorithmic discrimination protections, because if you're going to have this 7-year-old make a decision based on a whole lot of data that's been trained on that could impact human beings, no, I want somebody to be thinking about it. I want them to be doing a threat model in that, saying, okay, could it be subverted? And what we're seeing with vulnerabilities that are coming out of the AI space at the moment is it's almost like OWASP didn't exist. We are seeing really lame web application flaws where people can manipulate models, manipulate the APIs, and do all these legacy old fart web app attacks against AI systems. And you're like, why? You're not going down the data privacy. You're not going down safe and effective systems. And I think that's where I'm seeing this legislation and the Bill of Rights coming in and saying, actually, we're not gonna do the mistake we did with normal software dev. Like this could impact you. You need to be thinking about this now. And I think fair play to you. Like, I'm really glad to see that.
Yeah, I was surprised as well, because as soon as I heard, EU AI Act, I thought, oh, here we go again. It's cookie policy notices and things. I'm going to wear out my mouse button. And then some of the stuff was quite sensible, just that the output of Gen AI needs to be flagged as AI generated output. Deepfakes need to be flagged as AI generated. And that's, it's kind of sensible regulation.
Yeah, it is. And if people haven't seen the AI Safety Institute in the UK, they've pulled in some really impressive people. People that aren't just civil servants, like skills in OpenAI and other places. You're like, all right, they're coming from experience now, trying to make it more secure and safe. I'm like, that's clever. That's probably the first time we've actually seen this in a very long time, where you're like, oh, wow, government's actually leading this charge to say, you know what, we don't want to have a mess in our hands. So actually, let's get that person who's been building systems before, come and tell us how to do it. I'm like, okay, respect.
Yeah. Good. We are coming up towards the end of the webinar. We've got a number of questions come through. I think a lot of questions around Jeff. Great to see it. Will Jeff be able to ingest multimodal information? Yeah. So what if I'm talking about the thing I'm building and I've got a diagram and there's some documentation? Is it possible to ingest all of that and generate a diagram and a threat model?
Everything points to yes at the moment. So it seems to cope very well with, you might be better off, again, with AI systems, you've got to be a little bit careful about the context and the biasing and what you give first, etc. But it copes well with like giving it some documentation and some source code at the same time and generating something sensible from that. So yeah, subject to further experimentations, but it's going beyond all expectations so far.
Yeah. And another one on, will Jeff be able to use custom components created by the client?
Already can.
So that'll be from day one, it'll be able to do that. Awesome. Thank you. And is Jeff cloud only option, or will it also be available for on-prem?
Interesting question. So we've had some interesting conversations with on-prem customers. The current architecture, we're gearing up towards SaaS. But we do recognize that on-prem customers would probably want to be able to point our, let's call it Jeff, the architecture of Jeff, at their own hosted LLMs. The only challenge is we don't know like how much mileage you'll get out of that, because obviously we know that these models are very sensitive to change, and there's a massive difference between like GPT-4 and GPT-X preview, etc. So there may be some massaging that's needed to get it to work with a customer's hosted LLM. But we've got that in mind as we're building this. So the idea is hopefully yes, but we may need a few extra hops to get to that stage.
And I think that's also an interesting question here is, when we are, even with our own software, we're deploying into enterprises, and we are talking to sometimes external sources, be it Azure's AI or OpenAI. What are the concerns that enterprises currently have in using AI?
Shall I take that?
Sure.
Starting one, obviously, where's your data? Where's my data going, and what are you doing with it? I mean, that's are you pumping my data into OpenAI, and God knows what they're going to do with it, etc. There are simple there are simple regulations that just mean that they cannot do certain things with their data. It has to stay in a certain geographical location. It has to stay within their four walls, and whether they like it or not, they have to respect that. So that's one of the biggest feedback we've had is, especially for the regulated industries, what are you doing with my data and where's it going? And if it's within the four walls, effectively, they're happy with it.
Yeah. Good. We've got one last question here. Will there be any Jeff swag, such as Jeff stress balls? I don't know why you used stress balls as the example. Are you going to be going, come on, Jeff, give me the threat model? Maybe that's the right swag to have. We haven't thought about it, but I think we should.
To add to
Great
that, has there been a attempt to build a logo for Jeff using AI? Because I mean, that's what we expect, right?
I don't know if you very briefly saw the Slack window where Jeff was running. If you look very closely at that, the video's on YouTube. Anyone can go and find it on YouTube. From meeting to mitigation in minutes. Yes, Jeff is currently somebody who may or may not look like a certain famous actor with a similar name, but AI-ify, so sort of looking a bit more sort of futuristic. So yeah. Yeah, we definitely need swag.
Yeah, we need a logo first and then swag. Yeah. Claire's on the call. I'm sure she overheard. Yeah. Good. Super. Well, I think we're running up towards the end of the webinar. Thank you all for participating and for joining the webinar. We're going to be doing a few more on the AI theme, and the next one will probably be with Mr. Adam Shostak around prompt engineering for threat modeling. And watch our LinkedIn page for announcements on that, and we'll announce that date coming up soon. Great. Well, thanks very much to Daniel Cuthbert and Fraser Scott for joining me, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, bye.